The city was quiet, wrapped in the stillness of the night. In a small apartment on the outskirts of town, a phone screen glowed in the darkness. Imam Yusuf Rahman stared at the message on his screen, reading it over and over. It was from Daniel Asher, the one person who knew the truth he had spent years hiding. The words were clear, direct, and impossible to ignore. For months, Daniel had waited. He had listened to every excuse, held on to every promise, and believed that one day their secret would no longer be a secret. But patience had limits, and his had run out. He was ready to stop pretending, ready to tell the world. What he didn't realize was that the man he trusted most wasn't prepared for that, and he never would be. Hours passed in silence, no response, no explanation, just the weight of an unspoken decision hanging in the air. Somewhere in the city, Daniel waited, unaware that the man he cared for was wrestling with a choice that would change everything. By the time they finally met that night, the conversation they were meant to have would never reach its end, and when the sun rose the next morning, nothing would ever be the same. A respected leader, now at the center of a shocking revelation. A young man, full of dreams, suddenly gone. A story that left a community in disbelief, searching for answers to questions no one wanted to ask. What really happened in those final hours? What was said behind closed doors? And how did a relationship built on trust and devotion take such a devastating turn? This is a story of fear, secrecy, and the weight of choices that cannot be undone. Stay with us as we uncover the truth. And if you want to hear more real-life crime stories, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. Now, let's begin. The relationship had always been fragile, built on secrecy and the understanding that it could never be exposed. Yusuf Rahman had spent years crafting an image of devotion and integrity. To his followers, he was a man of discipline, a guide for those seeking the right path. But outside the mosque, his private world told a different story, one that could never see the light of day. For a long time, Daniel had accepted the rules. He had remained in the background, hidden away like a shadow. Their moments together were stolen from time, brief yet intense, filled with promises that always felt just out of reach. But the weight of secrecy was growing unbearable. Daniel had started to pull away, no longer content with being invisible. Then came the moment that changed everything. Daniel had made a decision, one that would shake the very foundation of their relationship. He had been patient long enough, and now he was ready to step forward. He no longer cared about the consequences. He wanted the truth to be known. His message was clear. The silence that followed was deafening. Yusuf had always feared this day. He had spent years avoiding it, convincing himself that if he kept everything in balance, nothing would ever fall apart. But Daniel's words shattered that illusion. There was no more time, no more avoiding, no more waiting. For the first time, the carefully built world Yusuf had controlled so well felt like it was slipping through his fingers. Fear crept in, twisting his thoughts. Exposure would mean everything he had worked for would be destroyed. His position, his reputation, his life as he knew it. It would all collapse. Panic set in. His hands trembled as he gripped his phone, staring at the unread messages. He wanted to believe there was still a way to fix things, to regain control before it was too late. But deep down, he knew. The walls were closing in. Daniel wouldn't back down this time, and that changed everything. The pressure had been building for weeks, but now it had reached a dangerous peak. Daniel had waited long enough. The lies, the excuses, the broken promises. He couldn't do it anymore. He needed the truth to come out, no matter the cost. In a dimly lit apartment, he made his final decision. There was no going back. He would tell the world about their relationship. If Yusuf wasn't ready to stand beside him, then he would do it alone. He had spent too long feeling like a secret, like something to be hidden away. He wasn't ashamed of who he was, and he refused to live in the shadows any longer. For Yusuf, the words were like a noose tightening around his throat. This wasn't a choice. It was a threat. Exposure didn't just mean embarrassment, it meant complete destruction. His reputation, his position, the life he had carefully built, all of it would be ripped apart. He had spent years being seen as a pillar of guidance, a leader that people turned to in moments of doubt. If the truth came out, he wouldn't just lose everything, he would become an outcast. His mind raced with fear. What would his congregation think? His family? The people who trusted him? Would he be abandoned, shunned, humiliated? Daniel wasn't just pushing for the truth, he was forcing Yusuf to make an impossible decision. And when people are cornered, they don't always think clearly. The hours after the ultimatum felt like a fog, thick with panic and confusion. Yusuf couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. Every sound, every passing moment felt like the countdown to disaster. He became restless, unable to sit still. His hands shook as he opened his laptop, typing and deleting words before settling on desperate searches, ways to make someone change their mind, ways to stop someone from talking. His thoughts spiraled, twisting between fear and anger. In one version of his mind, he could still reason with Daniel. He could convince him to stay quiet, to keep their secret just a little longer. But in another, darker version of his mind, he saw no way out. His heart pounded as he scrolled through articles, crime stories, cases of people who had felt trapped and what they had done to escape. Some walked away, others didn't. Maybe there was another way. Maybe he could make Daniel see reason. But what if he couldn't? The messages between them became shorter, colder. Daniel was determined. Yusuf was desperate. The tension was suffocating. The moment of no return was near. And once that moment arrived, there would be no way to undo what was coming. The night was cold, the streets nearly empty. A distant street lamp flickered, casting long shadows along the narrow path where Yusuf walked, his steps hurried, his breathing unsteady. His mind was racing, his body tense. He had told Daniel they needed to meet, that they needed to talk one last time, but he wasn't sure if it was to fix things or to stop them from unraveling completely. Daniel had agreed without hesitation. He had nothing to fear. He had been waiting for this moment, expecting an apology, expecting Yusuf to finally say the words he had longed to hear. But when he arrived at the secluded area where they always met, he sensed something was different. The air was thick with an unspoken weight. Yusuf's face was unreadable, his hands buried deep in his pockets. The conversation started low, almost calm. Daniel wanted answers. Yusuf gave none. Then the frustration took over. Words grew sharper, voices rose. Daniel wasn't backing down this time. He had wasted too many years on broken promises. But Yusuf wasn't backing down either. He couldn't afford to. The argument escalated, their voices swallowed by the night. Daniel reached out, maybe to reassure, maybe to plead. But Yusuf recoiled, the pressure inside him boiling over. His vision blurred, his heartbeat roared in his ears. His hands were suddenly on Daniel's shoulders, shaking him, pleading for him to stop. Then, a snap, a shove, a struggle, a moment that should have ended differently. Daniel staggered back, his breath hitching. He reached for his throat, his fingers trembling as they touched his skin. Confusion clouded his eyes. He tried to speak, but the words never came. Yusuf stood frozen, his chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. He hadn't meant for this to happen. Or had he? The thought was a whisper in his mind, too terrifying to answer. Daniel collapsed, his body limp against the pavement. The night swallowed the sound. And then, silence. Yusuf's hands trembled as he stared down at the unmoving figure before him. His mind was blank, unable to process what had just happened. His breath came in short, uneven gasps, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it would tear through his chest. He stepped back, as if trying to distance himself from the reality before him. But there was no escaping it. It had happened. It was done. Panic surged through his veins. He needed to think. He needed to act. His eyes darted around the empty street, searching for movement, for witnesses. But there was nothing. Just him and the unbearable weight of what he had done. His first instinct was to call for help, but then, what would he say? How would he explain this? No one would believe it was an accident, and even if they did, the truth about their relationship would come out. His secret would be exposed, and everything he had spent his life building would be destroyed. His breathing quickened. His hands clenched into fists. No one could know. He sank to his knees, his head bowed, whispering words not for Daniel, but for himself. Not for forgiveness, but for protection. The silence stretched on, pressing against his skin. The night was still, but Yusuf knew the peace would not last. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car passed by, its headlights sweeping across the alley before vanishing into the darkness. And in that moment, Yusuf knew. This was only the beginning. Morning came too soon, and with it, the beginning of the end. A street cleaner pushed his cart along the deserted alleyway, humming softly as he worked. The city was waking up, cars honking in the distance, the chatter of people heading to work. But the morning routine shattered when his eyes landed on something that didn't belong. A figure, still and unmoving. His heart pounded as he stepped closer. His breath hitched. He didn't need to check. He knew. Something terrible had happened here. The authorities were called. Within minutes, yellow tape stretched across the alley, flashing lights coloring the cold pavement. Officers exchanged hushed words, their expressions grim. The discovery wasn't just shocking, it was chilling. Detectives arrived, scanning the scene, taking in every detail. But something was odd. There were no signs of a struggle, no clear evidence of who had been here last. It was as if the crime had happened in complete silence. The first step was figuring out who the person was. That led them to the missing persons report filed just hours before. A worried friend had called the police, saying he hadn't come home. He wasn't answering his phone. It wasn't like him to disappear. Now they had their answer. The case wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was personal. Detectives turned to the victim's phone first. It was locked, but technology had its way of revealing secrets. Within hours, they had access to call logs, texts, and messages, the kind that told a story no one had expected. One name stood out. One person had been in contact with him constantly, and their last conversation? Heated. Urgent. The words were enough to make detectives look closer. The name belonged to someone well-respected, a man whose reputation didn't align with the messages they were reading. Yusuf. At first, it was just suspicion. But then, the pieces started falling into place. The deleted messages, the search history, questions about erasing evidence, making someone disappear. The carefully worded alibi that, under pressure, started to crack. When detectives arrived at his home, he was calm, too calm. He greeted them politely, offering tea, acting as if this was just another day. But behind that calmness, there was something else, something harder to explain. A stiffness in his movements, a slight tremble in his hands. He denied knowing anything, said he had spoken to Daniel but had no idea what happened to him after they parted ways. But then they showed him the messages, the last threats exchanged, The searches he thought were erased. And just like that, the story he had so carefully built, it collapsed. The weight of the truth was closing in. And now, there was nowhere left to run. The morning was quiet, the kind of silence that blankets a city before the day fully begins. But that silence was shattered in an instant. Marked cars lined the street, flashing lights reflecting off the windows of nearby buildings. Officers moved swiftly, their voices low but firm. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispers spreading like wildfire. Something was happening, something no one had seen coming. Inside his home, Yusuf sat on the prayer mat, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees. The knock at the door was sharp, insistent. He opened his eyes, his breath catching for just a second. He already knew. The door swung open, and in that moment, time seemed to slow. The officers stepped in, their presence filling the space. There was no fight, no desperate escape attempt. Yusuf simply stood, his face unreadable. His hands were pulled behind his back, cold metal snapping into place. He was led outside, past the growing crowd. Some gasped, some whispered, others simply stared in stunned silence. The respected leader, the man of faith. Now, just another suspect in handcuffs. But the most haunting part? He didn't say a word. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled, every corner occupied by cameras and reporters scribbling down every word. This wasn't just a trial, it was a spectacle. On one side, the prosecution painted a picture of a man who had carefully planned everything. They pointed to the digital evidence, the deleted messages, the searches on his computer. This wasn't a mistake, they argued. It was a decision, a choice. On the other side, the defense fought back. They spoke of pressure, of fear, of a man who had been pushed to his breaking point. They said it wasn't premeditated. It was a moment of desperation. Witnesses took the stand. Friends of Daniel spoke of his kindness, his dreams, his fear of being kept a secret. Others, those who knew Yusuf, struggled to reconcile the man they admired with the one now accused of something unthinkable. Then came the psychologists. They dissected his actions, his mindset, the weight of living a double life. They spoke of guilt, of the way secrets consume, of how shame can twist a person into someone even they don't recognize. As the trial went on, the tension in the room grew thicker. The evidence was strong. But was it enough? Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The verdict. The judge's voice rang through the silent courtroom. Guilty. And in that moment, everything changed. The news spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Headlines screamed the story. Social media exploded with outrage, theories, and debates. The people who once admired him now stood divided. Some shook their heads in disbelief, refusing to accept that the man who led them in prayer could be responsible for something so horrifying. Others felt betrayed, their faith shaken by the hidden life he had lived. His closest followers whispered about tests and tribulations, arguing that everyone falls to temptation, that no man is without sin. But others saw no excuse. A life had been taken, and no amount of prayer could undo it. And then there were those who mourned for Daniel, friends, family, people who had loved him, but never truly knew the weight he carried. They grieved not just for his loss, but for the secret that had cost him everything. But beyond the public outrage and sympathy, one question lingered in the air, one that no one dared to speak out loud. How many others were living in fear, trapped between who they were and who the world expected them to be? If you were Daniel, would you have exposed the truth, knowing the risks? If you were Yusuf, would you have lived with the secret or faced the consequences of being honest? Could this have ended differently? Or was this tragedy inevitable? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Share your thoughts, your opinions, and your questions. And if you want to hear more true crime stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. There are many more untold stories waiting to be uncovered.